First of all, if I can do a little pitch for Senator Kerry and Teresa Heinz Kerry. This is a very good book. As a clearly right-wing reader, I would commend this book to anybody who wants to see interesting examples of local leadership making a difference. And we're going to disagree, as you'll discover, I'm sure, not to your surprise, in a few minutes. But I just want to say, first of all, I would agree with about 60% of this book, which is more than most of my conservative friends would expect. And I would urge them to read it. And I agree with Senator Kerry's proposal that we should incentivize the gas stations to retrofit in order to E85. It dramatically improves gasoline usage. If you incentivize the market, I agree. You have to incentivize it. I'm not for a laissez-faire approach. But I think if you consciously set out to create a green economy, you might be startled how rapidly it changed. Which has worked. And I agree with the analysis you have, and I've met with the Environmental Defense Fund about it. Take the auto companies. The fact is the American auto companies right now, and I agree with you about, I mean, you and I in this sense are very parallel because we've both been out in Detroit for years trying to say to Detroit, there is this future, and it isn't the past. It's a very tricky model. There was a long history in America of civil society, and frankly, your book has some great examples of people who went out and were citizens in the best sense of the word and made a big difference. And sometimes they were citizens despite the government, which is part of what I want to start with here.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that?
Sure.
I'm excited to hear you talk about the urgency. I really am. And given that, albeit you still sort of have a different approach, what would you say to Senator Inhofe and to others in the Senate who are resisting even the science? What's your message to them here today?
My message, I think, is that the evidence is sufficient that we should move towards the most effective possible steps to reduce carbon loading of the atmosphere.
And do it urgently, now.
Do it urgently, yes. But let me, if I can, let me. And so you end up in these kind of cycles. And part of the reason I was delighted to accept John Bradman's invitation, and I'm delighted to be here with Senator Kerry, is I think there has to be if you will, a green conservatism. There has to be a willingness to stand up and say, all right, here's the right way to solve these as seen by our value system. And now to have a dialogue about what's the most effective way to solve it, rather than to get into a fight over whether or not to solve it. And when I was Speaker, I think it's fair to say that on things, on a whole range of biodiversity issues, I intervened again and again on the side of the environment.
Absolutely.
And you know, I really do believe. But I think it's very, you know, I would be delighted to see open-ended hearings. By open, I don't mean in time, but I mean in terms of the topic. That started and said, if we're serious about a dramatic global reduction in carbon loading over the next 20 years, starting immediately, I'm not talking about in 20, if we're serious about it, what are the different models that might work? And are there, in fact, incentive-based, market-oriented models that would work as well or faster? And is there a chance they would produce the technologies that would make it easier for India and China to decide you can have green prosperity? Because if you can develop green prosperity, you change the entire trajectory for the planet, not just for the U.S. I would love to see, and Senator Kerry certainly has far more influence with Majority Leader Reid than I do, but I would love to see hearings that didn't start by saying, let's have a fight over cap and trade, which I think is, I mean, they can probably eventually pass something, but I think is not the way to start. The way to start is to say, what are the optimum choices we can make strategically to minimize carbon loading in the next 20 years? And I believe we can bring a science and technology and entrepreneurship incentive-based model that would at least be worth being considered seriously by the House and Senate. Let me just make 2 points with this. And obviously we have a significant difference about how we think government works. First of all, I think if you have the right level of tax credit, it isn't just exactly voluntary. My guess is there's a dollar number at which you would have every utility in the country agree they're all going to build carbon sequestering power plants. So this, I mean, I think that this is a definable alternative.
You know, this is a huge transition. You actually want the government to do it. I want the private sector to do it.
No. I want the government to
Because you want the government to pay for it with a great big tax credit. If it's big enough to do what you say, it's actually going to be more expensive than letting the private sector go out and capitalize it in the private market.
Well, let me just say no, because what you just... And you said something else, though, which is really captured. I'm going to sell a few more books for you, John. You've really captured in part in this book, and I just want to close this because it's what Dennis Smith has done such a great job on in discussing CompStat and metrics in New York. We don't today have the right bureaucratic enforcement models. And I think here's another zone where we'd have a lot of common interest in finding, for example, between information technology, wireless technology, the capability to have real-time monitoring on a scale that's totally different than the current EPA models. And that would give you a much richer information flow and would allow you to actually have enforcement that's dramatically more effective. And I just want to close it with this from my side, and I'll yield to John, but I really am a Theodore Roosevelt Republican. I mean, I think that there are moments when you intervene and you say this really matters. I grew up I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which was where Gifford Pinchot had been governor and had been the great Secretary of the Interior. And the Pennsylvania Game and Fish Commission, our family had a cabin up in the mountains. The Pennsylvania Game and Fish Commission, when I was a kid, was a model of genuine conservation, of making the case that if you didn't care for the state, it would disappear and you would have cheated your children. And I really do think in that sense we can find a bipartisan dialogue that brings us back to that tradition and that enables you to look forward to your grandchildren having a better future than they're going to have otherwise.
I want to voice the appreciation that all of you, by your applause, have offered for what I think has been one of the most elevating, illuminating discussions of a major national and international issue that in my years in public life